This is Thursday, February 27th. We're shifting gears. We're now working on a House Bill 50, which deals with doing an inventory of state-owned property with the goal of seeing if any of those properties would be available for affordable housing to be built on any of the state-owned properties. As the bill was originally introduced, it dealt with just the commissioner of BGS. We've taken testimony from BGS, we've taken testimony from AOT, because there is other state lands out there. There's also state lands in the Agency of Natural Resources. So we're trying to vet, do we bring it beyond BGS or do we leave it just in BGS? And who does the inventory? And also, when is the inventory presented? So we have the original bill, and I know that Hunter's had been working on expanding the bill a little bit. It's about that. And then also BGS has also gone back to the drawing board, and they would like to propose some language changes. So the commissioner, I'm assuming, is going to present this. And have you submitted the language to Phil?
Wanda Minoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, for the record, Paul has submitted. Whole district has said no, but I did bring copies.
Okay, great copies. Mine up. You and I are the old school.
I like paper.
Yeah, paperwork's better. A little bit, and then it will get posted on our web.
Yeah, that's good. Something to get him.
Let's get started here.
It's more.
Gosh, you look like you're. It's so low.
So, good morning, Wanda Minoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, for the record. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come back and discuss H50 with you. I appreciated the time that you spent looking at our presentation, I believe last week, on existing language and what currently directs the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services around the inventory. And we referenced the space book. So with that, Madam Chair, that was in response to the original bill that was introduced. And then we do have the proposed, I think it's referenced as take two. Some language that is proposing shifting the collection of the inventory and some directions on H50, and that's what I'd like to respond to, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you. So I don't know if there's enough copies.
And Cole, you have sent this to Phil?
Just going to.
Okay.
Well, then I can go to over.
Okay. Oh, I need one. But I have one. So the consideration for revisions to H50 is proposing that the Secretary of Administration, in consulting with BGS, Natural Resources, and the Agency of Transportation, shall identify state-owned land, buildings, and parking lots suitable for conversion to affordable housing. And then it outlines some criteria, which is the proximity to downtowns, availability of water, electric, sewer hookups, and access to public transportation. And that then we would report, or the Secretary of Administration would report no later than February 1 of each odd numbered years. And then it identifies, or it proposes that
Wait a minute, I gotta get focused here. Where are you reading off of? Where you? Okay, so you're going from what Connor had proposed.
yes,
Okay,
the
so,
new proposal.
so Connor put out a proposal back on the 20th of February,
Title take two, that's
Yes.
correct, that's, yes.
okay? So that's the one you're working off of,
Correct.
not the bill as it was introduced.
No, because we already presented our comments and thoughts on the bill as introduced.
Yeah. Got it.
Okay, good to, so do I need to you're in a good place. I just want, I
Why
don't.
don't you rephrase what you were?
Thank you. So the language, that I was referring to is some consideration for change to H50 as introduced, which talks about or recommends that the Secretary of Administration, in consulting with BGS, the Agency of Natural Resources, and the Agency of Transportation, that we identify state-owned land, buildings, and parking lots suitable for conversion of affordable housing. And then this outlines some criteria, which is proximity to downtowns, availability of water, and access to public transportation. And then it identifies a report, and then you have a proposal on the disposition and development process. So our comments in general go back to the original presentation. We have a means in which to collect this inventory. And we have commented that for us to determine affordable housing is really not about buildings and general services or the report. It's really about the developer. It's about being able to give you inventory for you, the legislature, to look at and consider, does it meet your criteria or is it possible for affordable housing? I think that's part of the presentation from before, is how do you define what is affordable housing, and how do we determine that it's acceptable for that? Because we can put it on the market, and I'm not sure, that's where you get into the position on the development process, that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development would request proposals for the conversion. That's something for you to consider. But I think what's most important in what we're talking about is, first, you want the inventory. You need to have the inventory, and we discussed and presented all of the inventory under the jurisdiction of BGS, and that is the Space Book, and we issue that book annually. So when I look at the proposal, and as we talk to you as a committee moving forward, the first thing you need is where you would like to have this inventory, as I read it, in one place. Collected in one place. Current statute under the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, which is Title 29, Section 163, already has an established method to collect the inventory.
So I'm gonna stop you there, Commissioner. Because your new language here pertains to that particular section of law. When people look, it's 29 VSA 165. Okay, so you're offering this as a counter proposal to what Connor offered last week,
That is correct, Madam Chair.
just so the committee can follow this. We got three different proposals in front of us. We have the bill as it was introduced. We've got Connor presented his language last week that would change the bill as introduced.
Correct.
And then today, Commissioner BGS is offering counter proposal to Connor's language, which would be a strike all to H50. Do the new folks follow that? Because it's really important to follow this,
I
understand this.
and
John and then Joe.
Go ahead, Joe.
But H50 is introduced as top table.
No. Yeah,
No, it's not.
It's what?
it's
Oh,
not,
I thought H50, I mean, it hasn't been formally withdrawn, but I didn't think we were considering H50 as introduced any longer.
we don't know yet because we haven't worked it through yet to
Okay.
figure out where we are. We have three versions in front of us.
Very well.
This is part of how we work as a committee. You've got the underlying bill. We have to decide. You have an amendment to it that Connor has proposed. We haven't taken any action on it. And then Commissioner BGS has offered different language to Connor's proposal, which in essence is also to the underlying language in H50. So we got three versions in front of us. We haven't decided which version we're gonna support or a combination of those three versions.
Could you pass me Gino's sheet?
Okay.
I'm
Sure.
good. I
So I
understand.
really want the new members to understand this. I'm not too worried about the old or previous members, because this is all part of a legislative process.
I guess I do have a question, Commissioner. With this new, right? Is that all new or is that coming off of 29 VSA Section 165?
So what is current language, what is in current law in her proposed is all of this is current law until you get down to what's underlined.
Got it.
What is underlined is proposed new language to current law.
Got it. Thank you.
It's the same as the bill that was introduced in H50. Everything that is underlined in H50 is proposed new law. Everything that is not underlined is current law.
Under E, it would be and land is also
And
underlined.
under what?
Under E, section E, and land is also underlined.
Yes, yeah. James, I keep forgetting your name.
Listen, I forgot my name yesterday. This is actually more for Connor. So we have this language, we have your language, we have your original bill, things are changing. Obviously, this is your initiative. Can you highlight?
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet?
We're not
We're
there.
going back with Connor.
The commissioner needs to present her language.
Okay.
Oh, would you like me to continue, Madam Chair?
Just want these folks to.
So
Yeah.
I have really appreciated the conversation around what I believe the intent of this language is. I've had conversations with the secretary. And so and again, it goes back to inventory. You're looking for the inventory so you can do your analysis to forward some of your initiatives and consider those. So for me, the first place we need to do is get the inventory before we start determining maybe the evaluation of how that looks. And that's coming from the conversations that I've had with the committee, the questions you've asked, and the presentation. So I'm looking at the existing language under Title 29, 165, and based on those conversations, because this already exists, I am proposing that we amend Section G that expands, and I apologize, I'm looking for the land that you just referenced. Thank you.
It's hard to see it.
Yes. So in Section E, that we're saying that where it currently directs me to maintain an inventory of all state-owned buildings, we're proposing that we add the word land. And that to me starts to collect the inventory that you're looking for, the information that you want. And then in Section G, amending that, because currently I can determine the format that's prescribed to get the inventory, which connects to the space book that I presented to you. And that we actually add language directing the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services to include information regarding whether the buildings are vacant or land is not needed for state purposes. And that would come in the format in which we collect the information. We talked about this a little bit. I think some of the examples is why we look at all of the land and natural resources. It may be land, but there may be an easement on it. There may be a conservation. It may be a part of a state park. And we're trying to, and what I'm offering is through this method, we would be able to eliminate some of that information. So we're not creating this large list and then spending time going through if there are any restrictions. And I really think that's the word restrictions, because there may be land in the Agency of Transportation inventory that is identified for a project. And so through the form and collecting that and being able to put the data in a usable format for you, the legislature, to look at, I think is the first step. And in looking at the bill and understanding the goal that you're trying to get, it's a lot of work to do in in the short period of time without having the inventory. And so we're presenting this alternative to you for consideration, understanding you want the inventory. And this it is, you know, we strongly believe we can collect it for you in this manner with the language.
I know Troy has a question, but I'm gonna hold off a minute. So the thing that really resonated, Connor, when we talked about this last time, was if we can only get an inventory, if we had the inventory across state agencies, not just BGS, but across state agencies, if we had that inventory, then that could be the spark to have developers or folks really see what is available. So the key was really getting the inventory so that the next step could be taken. Is that?
Yeah, sure. I could weigh in a bit now if you want.
No, I don't.
Don't get ahead of the process.
No, because I want to make sure that people understand what the commissioner is proposing.
Yeah.
You got to look at the language, folks. Then I'll come to you.
Good to go?
No, I want them to look at the language.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. I think we can hone that language in a little bit.
Yeah, but what the language is saying is if you look in E, Commissioner of BGS is going to maintain an inventory of all state-owned buildings, and what's being added is in land. So it's being proposed, because right now they're only doing buildings. So we want to expand that. What's being expanded here is to also look at land. And the commissioner needs to update this information. The information is going to be coming from the process that is in G. So you got to look at G. So the commissioner is going to reach out to the head of agencies, all the agencies in state government. And the commissioner is going to request this information when requested by the commissioner. So the commissioner is in the driver's seat to get this information from the other entities in state government, which could be AOT, ANR, forest parks, whatever. And then that inventory needs to cover state footage for use, actual use. Then what's being added is that in this format, the commissioner would also need to include information regarding whether the building of the land is not needed for state purposes. So that's the new language blending in with the old, with the current. Do folks understand this?
Absolutely.
Because this is really important to understand that linkage. Troy.
I do want us to consider whether or not we can narrow this down to buildings or land that are already on existing infrastructure, town infrastructures, wastewater, sewer, all of that. And then I would just suggest on that final sentence to have the report include percentage of vacancy rather than just vacant or not, but percentage of vacancies.
So, you know, when you look at the data and how we collect it in the space book, I think that when we get the data, it's logically going to tell us based on where it's located.
Sure.
We know as a state if it's municipal or not. So I don't think it has to necessarily has to be defined. The percentage that you were just talking about, if you could just say that one more
You've got it
time.
currently, will include information regarding whether buildings are vacant or whether buildings are vacant. That's an on or off. That's a yes or no. So I'm wondering if we can have that include buildings that are partially vacant. as
So
well.
there are, I would like to, first of all, we do the space book annually. And in that space book, it identifies how much square footage gross we have, how much square footage of usable and what our vacancy rate is. And that changes every year. So, and there's a summary, and we also have in our current inventory buildings and the acreage that they're on in the space book. So if you go to the last section of the space book, it talks about all of our, it lists the buildings and their acreage. So doing I think what you're asking, can we also include utilization in this analysis? And that is something I would ask that not be a part of the space book, because I, as commissioner and other authority, have a responsibility of evaluating, looking at use. I'm directed to house people in state-owned space before entering leases. And I also, as the administration, understand the conversations that have been occurring about how are we utilizing buildings, especially with teleworking as part of our policy. I am doing a utilization analysis right now, and I'll be of Montpelier. I don't need to be directed to do that. I'm asking that I not. It's an analysis that I think we have to look at as leases expire, as we look at reassigning space, as that's part of our daily business and property management. I don't think we've had an opportunity, representative, to sit and talk about that with the committee. So I don't believe it is the right place in that report. And I think utilization analysis of space is an important task, and that's part of my responsibility, and it is something that I'm doing.
And then James.
Yeah, and being on the rural caucus, I think that knowing all the possibilities is the best way to go here, even though they're not on septic, or, maybe some of this land isn't. There are ways to create small little pocket neighborhoods that we could use if this land was available to different, in the developing world. I just think that I totally agree that there should be fenced in just to spaces where that have, septic and electrical and water. So I agree with what you said.
And we do need an inventory. We all agree, the administration, and we're willing to start. First, let's get you the inventory. And because that's going to be a significant change in task just from passage of this bill. If it passes, to putting that into our process that we start in July. Because we start the next inventory space book at the beginning of the fiscal year.
So James.
Well, Troy's question made me think, if we have several buildings that are like 30% capacity, we consolidate workforce into the same building. But I realize it gets much more complicated than that. It's not as simple as raw numbers. It's just making me think about that. But you guys look at that on a regular basis anyway?
So I am, and I actually am my property management director. You met Eric Pembroke. We're about 30 days into collecting data. We've started in Montpelier because, that's one of the areas that we know people want information on. In our space book, we identify, it says occupancy in the column on the buildings, on the space. That's not when I testified the last time, I said that's not really occupancy. That's what the space is designed for. So we are currently taking that data and we are looking at actual use of the spaces on a daily, weekly, and we're collecting data. I think the usage is higher than what some people see, which is, and I've just got preliminary numbers, right now.
Yeah.
But that is the data that has to be used for planning that's already identified in statute, where you direct me to utilize state-owned space before doing private leases or other things. So I have to have that data. I need to understand what is the occupancy, what is going on in those buildings. And we're working on that. And the team's doing a pretty phenomenal job. And we are pulling out the blueprints. We are looking at the spaces. We are looking at who it is assigned to. We're using data from the badges. How many times are people accessing? We're doing walkthroughs. And it's important data to collect. But I've got to be able to collect it. I've got to be able to analyze it. I've got to make sure the data is really reflecting the use.
Yeah, and I understand all that. I just, for the purpose of the bill, not whether I'm advocating or not advocating, but for the purpose of the bill, I would assume they want, the author would like to know that information for their own edification to whether or not a building should be considered for this purpose.
And,
That's all.
and Representative, I understand your point. And again, so this is where, getting the inventory, and then maybe I will have more information on that, and that it's a work in progress. I'm not going to have all of that done. It's not feasible for us to have all of that done quickly.
I absolutely understand. I just.
Right.
Yes.
So.
Oh, sorry if I cut you
No,
off.
that's
It seems to me like what Troy is looking for is kind of already covered in lines 3 to 5 of G there. Square footage available for use, square footage in actual use. I mean, don't you just kind of divide one column by another to get to what he's asking about? You're sort of already doing it, right?
Well, we already have that, but I believe
Was the question different?
that it
Maybe I
was,
missed it.
what is the actual utilization? So we've determined that you have this as a capacity within a footprint, within a building. But now the next layer is what's the actual utilization? Because before COVID and before teleworking, if you were directed, if your day was 7:45 to 4:30, you reported to your workstation. Workstations have been realigned. And I think, that's how I interpreted what you were asking. What's your actual utilization
So use
today?
is not utilization, right? Because utilization could be one day a week. It's in use, but.
Correct,
Okay.
right? So we have capacity and design of who can occupancy.
Okay, you-
So there's the occupancy, and then how is it currently being utilized? And I, as again, I need that information as well for us to be looking at what is vacant. I think to the members of the committee, whenever we determine we do not have a need for a space or a building, I bring that forward, or the commissioner brings that forward to this committee with a proposal to sell or to make change. And sometimes you look at those properties and put guardrails around them. And we've been very good about looking at where I will use the Stanley Wasson property in Waterbury. We had no need for that. We asked permission to sell it. You worked with the community and you gave them first option. And for them to come up with their plan. And if they chose not to in the time period, then we would go out on the market. We also have authority that directs the commissioner to sell property in it with a process to the highest bidder, et cetera, market value. So having that inventory and looking at what would you want to put guardrails around that? And would you want to be looking at property to determine if it's in the best interest for affordable housing? I think you have to know those other parameters and what it looks like.
If you want.
Lead us.
Okay,
You're
okay.
good now, though. Thank you.
So what G is saying, if you go back to the language, is BGS is going to maintain an inventory, but in order to get to that inventory, what G is saying, if you look at the language, the commissioner of BGS needs to request from each agency an inventory of their land or their buildings. So it's dependent on the commissioner of BGS requesting the information.
Mhm.
It's not an automatic. So I just want to highlight this out for committee members.
So, Madam Chair, my intent in this proposal, so currently it says the head of each agency shall prepare and forward to the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services when requested on the format prescribed. I had done some research, and there was a point in time where we used to collect the land that you've been talking about, and that process stopped. So I felt to work in partnership that if you statutorily now tell me that I'm going to collect the land, so we get all of the buildings, but we stopped collecting the inventory on the land because I went back and looked at some past space books, and there was a shift. I can't explain why, but I understand the importance of that information. So now this language would require that the commissioner wouldn't have a choice. The form in which is used would require the inventory of the land. That's the intent.
Right. The inventory would include the buildings and land. That's an
Right.
E. If you go down to G, that information that's coming from all the agencies needs to be requested by the commissioner. So 1 year, the commissioner can request it. 3 years later, a new commissioner may not request it. That's what
That's not the intent and how we wrote it. So I appreciate you saying that. I'm saying because this is in 165, this is saying I shall. And maybe it doesn't say that, but that was in putting this forward and adding this, we're really saying this is the inventory that you have now in the space book. It shall include that last line.
Right. It's a shall that you do an inventory. Shall maintain an inventory.
Yeah.
And that inventory shall include buildings and lands. But it's update the information received under subsection G of this section. So you go down to G. And the request needs to come from a commissioner of BGS to each of the agencies to prepare their inventory. So it's up to the commissioner. That's how I'm interpreting the
Yeah,
language. Now,
you're
we
right.
don't have a lawyer here,
No, you're right.
but one commissioner could request it. And then a new commissioner comes in the next year and they don't request.
Because the dictate isn't that the commissioner asked for it, it's that they shall comply if the commissioner.
So there's sections of statute that aren't here, and I apologize, I did not bring mine with me, and the space book is already required. This document is a shall now. I only offered amendments from 166 that would be included in this. So we have to produce the space. This inventory is a part of building our budget and fee for space. So you cannot not do the space book and update the current status of the spaces. Again, what has not been included is the other agencies' lands as it was at one time. So I think we're saying the same thing, Madam Chair, and that I read this, that the commissioner doesn't have a choice. The commissioner now has to include in the inventory of the space book, the land as outlined here. I will be happy to go back and make sure that it's.
This is the land holdings, but you're just saying it's just BEGS land holdings right now.
Correct,
And you just
correct.
Open that up to the rest of everybody.
Correct. So the space book is required.
Yep.
And what this language is trying to do, pointing to Representative Sweeney holding up the space book, is that we now report the land holdings of the other entities. We collect the data. We're not going to make decisions about, the Agency of Transportation's land or the Agency of Natural Resources. In that inventory, if there's land that the legislative body wants to have specific questions on, then those that are in charge of that land should be sitting with the committee and discussing that. But to give you, again, back to, I'm trying to understand the intent and working on what's feasible, to be able to give you the inventory, to me is the first step and the most critical.
So, thanks very much, Commissioner. I appreciate the collaborative nature of this
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank
I
you.
know together we're going to get this over the finish line. So, pulling back again, the original intent of this bill is we need 8,000 housing units a year, according to the governor. I believe we need to act aggressively to do that, and nothing should be sacred, including the state land that we own, much of which is near population centers, downtown areas that would be good for affordable housing. We had some initial discussion on this, and I get the sense from the committee that maybe the tortoise wins the race a wee bit on this, and we should be looking at the inventory as the first step before going into a process like the one I outlined in my second draft of the bill, which would require ACCD to work directly with developers to start getting this ball rolling. But I think the legislature can play that role ourselves if we have all the information we need to make an intelligent decision on this. And that would be looking at the inventory that may be possible to develop. The idea is to generate creative ideas in this building. And, I think a lot of that's going to come organically from the people who represent the particular districts, but they need to identify what land exists there. So I think, I can get on board with this direction. And again, I do appreciate this. The chair's concern, I would feel better if that was tightened up, that language a little bit.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, Commissioner, so when we put and land, that would be all state land, right? In there, it's not just BGS maintained land. We're talking AOT and A&R as well, right?
So yes, and I think we have to look at 165, Title 2165, the whole thing. We've just identified E, F, and G here, right? All of the direction, but it would be at a minimum collecting that inventory. I don't, and I will say in putting the form together, it would be available. So we may have some criteria that if it's, I'm going to use A&R, that if it's a state park, or if it's land in their inventory that they have a conservation easement on it and it can't be developed. We shouldn't be reporting on that, but I need to figure out, how do I get that information? How do I sort that and collect it in a meaningful way?
Yep.
But when we look at G, it's when it's buildings and vacant land that's not needed for state purposes. So we're saying not state purposes, but it may also be land that has restrictions. And the state purposes. And again, I was not here for the Agency of Transportation's testimony, but they may have land that they have a plan for, right? They may be developing. So we don't want to just collect all of this information and turn it over to you and then sit here and say, oh, but you can't look at that because we're going to build we're going to redirect a bridge. I'm just, this is under a conservation protection and you can't do that. I want to be able to find a way to filter some of that out for you.
And I think if we go in that direction, again, I feel comfortable with that as long as there's a trigger somewhere in this language that gets that information in front of us and sort of automates a process where every biennium this is submitted. And the space book's great, but it's a little bit fragmented. It's a little bit not user friendly. So to have a presentation each biennium to this committee, which is the Committee of Jurisdiction for all state lands, to say, okay, this is how much land we've lost or buildings over the last year. This is how much we've acquired or whatever. This is how the footprint's changed. And we have that conversation with all the state land and buildings in one format. So I think we're maybe getting there, and then the ideas can flow.
So are you saying having that presentation separate from this Facebook? Because nobody even knows. this
I didn't know the space book existed last
No,
biennium,
no,
and I think that's a problem. That's why I think we should put it in statute that we're having a discussion about this each biennium.
But would it be a different presentation for the inventory, or would it be inventories included in this Facebook?
I feel as long as it's included, it's okay.
Included in this Facebook report.
And I think, again, we talked about this at the beginning of the year and, goals and stuff, and data is important. And I think it was a great, observation for all of us that the committee has changed. The space book has been produced since, forever. And it's we use every day in our business at BGS, but we didn't align it to some of the business and the conversations here.
And I think it can result in good collaboration between the branches too, just looking at the prison options that were discussed there. If I'm an Essex rep, I might look at the site that wasn't chosen and say, I've got a pitch for 100 units here, it's.
So and I really, I appreciate the committee taking time to, have this conversation with me. I'm more than willing to go back and look at all of 166 to see if there's some suggestions to align with some of this discussion, or you could ask me not to, and you could work with, a draft person, but I think we could look at it and, in totality and see if there's any of that. but I really appreciate having the discussion around, we've got to have the inventory first.
So I just want to move this along because we have a lot of people scheduled to testify at 11. So the one thing I'm hearing from you, Connor, is you're okay, because this is your bill too, you've been working on. You're fine with approaching inventory like this, but what I'm hearing is there needs to be more clarity in terms of how it's reported back to the legislature, that it should be done every year, biannually. Is that what I'm picking up?
Yeah, and I think we just need to automate it, right? Like, again, I'm concerned with the when requested line, that even if that's not happening in practice, maybe the next commissioner doesn't request it too frequently, so I'd love the trigger there, you know, it's.
Well, it is happening. What isn't happening is the land.
Okay,
And so that's by amending the language to include the land. And that's why we, when we looked at all of the language and we say, this happens, this is done annually. And going through it, what was lost is the collection of the data on the land. It focuses only on state-owned buildings.
so like AOT garages would be in there currently?
So it used to be, my favorite book is 1988 Space Book. So something changed.
It's an interesting favorite book.
Exactly. So, we're going to look at all of the land. And so there was a point in time where we had a section in the Space Book that was a summary of AOT's inventory. And it included where their buildings were, where their land was, and it was there. I think, so, yeah, I haven't designed it yet. I haven't worked through all of it, but it existed at one time. This is to bring it back, because if you just report on land and you don't know if there's a building on it, which is what we discovered in the Space Book. So we're committed to modifying it and collecting the inventory, Representative Casey. So Connor, boy, how's that?
It's fine.
I just- Yes. I
Think
just
something
wanna-
was worse.
So move this along. Where are we as a committee?
Well, I
Do
know,
we look favorably on the language of the commissioners as proposed?
Because I think we need the
we do need to see
inventory.
more on that 165, just say it.
So
So,
we gotta
as-
work on our drafts.
yeah, but as you pointed out, that language doesn't require it, maybe be happening. So that first sentence, we need to clarify that.
In G.
Yes.
And then what about a report back?
I just took a stab at a draft here.
So that's my second part, and I don't want to create extra work, but so if there's state lands or buildings, then they're being used for something. Like we're just talking about only reporting out land that's available, buildings that are available. But having a report that says what, like say the AOT has land and they may build a bridge, as you use for an example. Well, we're not gonna know that unless we see a report that says this land's to be used for something else. So forgot to.
I'm not proposing, and I don't believe and I know we don't have the capacity to go that deep. I would like to, as Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, collect the inventory and then, and present it in a form that's usable, to look at. And, I think I'm not sure why, like, and it's really irrelevant. I believe at any time we can bring this report to you. We learned it's something that's not being used. I'm asking not to do another report on a report that I already do. I'd like to be able to find a way to present that data that already exists. And, so I will only be collecting and presenting the inventory. I do not want to be the entity responsible for doing the analysis on the inventory that you just referred to.
So gotcha, just.
Connor and then Sean.
So, but I feel like a little analysis might be needed in your language, just for properties that are vacant or not needed for state purposes. You'd at least need to talk to the commissioners, or like if they if they
Well,
don't.
they're gonna
make-
report that, and I mean, that's where, let me align the space book without having all of these specific tasks, because I have to look at everything the same. That language on the buildings is what we've always brought to this committee. When we've determined based on statute, there's multiple sections that says the commissioner shall assign space before leasing and utilize state-owned space. We determine, and I'm gonna, there's property on Baldwin Street that we determine no use for. We bring that to you because the statute's very clear that that's presented to the legislature, this committee of jurisdiction, with a request to sell. And you give me the commissioner authority to sell or reassign. So I'm probably being a little linear in this right now, I think in my thinking, but to me, the steps are there. And I don't want to create another process that diverts from that. I'd like to collaboratively look at how can we align.
And we could maybe huddle commissioner
Yeah.
at some point, but,
Yeah, I've got a thought, so, Sean, and then I'm gonna move this along.
Well, I was just gonna say, it seems to me if you pick some land, looking down the road, we see the space book and you see the land. The word's gonna go out to like, we want to build on that property. Okay, well, who do we need to inform about that? And then we're gonna find out if we can or we can't.
Mhm.
I think it's just naturally gonna happen from AOT or from Fish and Wildlife or whoever we talk to, right? Doesn't that seem
Yeah, I
like
guess
it's
the
gonna
question,
happen?
okay, let's just use that Essex land that's not selected for the prison. How does that show up in the book, And again, we can maybe not take committee time for this, but.
Yeah, we've got to push this.
Right.
Yes, so what I'd like to do, we need a draftsperson, we need a lawyer, we need our lawyer. I'd like Connor, James, and myself to work with our lawyer, to go through all this nuance and to reach out to the commissioner and come back with another draft.
I would really appreciate that and that collaboration and looking at it.
Yeah, because we.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We need a strike all amendment, and we need the language to be succinct in terms of legalese, that lawyer. So I'm cutting it off.
Oh, I'm, thank you. Have a great day.
Ready to go.
Thanks, Wanda.
Thank you.
Mary, could you put that back in the meeting? Thanks.
So we're gonna shift gears really fast. Again, folks, we're gonna go back to our special bill.
Jared, with the last bunch of people.
Yes, please do. They're probably wondering what's happening. I agree, Wanda.
Yeah. Light cross now, sleeping.
Yeah.
It's then.
So we're shifting. Somebody's got their microphone. So we're shifting gears, folks. We are back on the capital bill. We're the agency of community development. And we're looking at the 3Bs. We're looking at Barry, Bennington, and Middleborough. With the projects that the governor has put in $1 million for each. J4. It's lines 41, 42, 43 in the spreadsheet. It's the agency of government and community development within our tabs. So, trying to get settled here, folks. So we have Commissioner Farrell in. And we had a whole list of questions. About 3 projects. I'm assuming you're gonna start us off again, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, sure.
And then today we also have folks here on Zoom and as well in the building, in the room from Bennington, from Brattleboro, and from Barry, to speak about each of their individual things. So Commissioner, if you want to come up and sort of introduce this again and introduce the folks that are with us today, because we wanted to speak to each individual folks in terms of getting a feel for the concept of your project, what the whole project cost is, when you plan on going to construction, on the time frame for spending any state money you might receive, and how much would this really result in permanent affordable housing? And then how would we be assured that? So those are some of the overlay questions that we had. So Commissioner Welk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. Nice to see everybody again. So thank you. That's a great introduction, Madam Chair. So as folks may recall, there's in the capital bill request for $3.1 million, $1 million to two projects, and then $1.1 million to another to invest in infrastructure. That's a hurdle to getting these housing projects off the ground. In one case, the infrastructure will continue to be owned by the city. In the other two, it'll be an investment that will be shared by the projects themselves. And I believe we have, so we've got Nicholas Storella Castro from Berry City. We've got Shannon from the town of Bennington, and we've got Chloe Leary from the Winston Prouty. Well, the Winston Prouty itself, as well as representing the future project, the village at Winston Prouty. I don't know, Madam Chair, if you have a preferred order for these, Nicholas, since you're in the room. Do you want to?
Be happy to.
Okay, certainly.
You can come into the hot seat.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Go Rams.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
So Coloradoan?
Yeah.
Well, I was there for grad school for 2 years.
I grew up in Fort Collins. My mom's.
Small world.
Madam Chair, I have a brief presentation, if I may, and I'm just going to bring it up to the screen here. Just a 3 or 4 slides. I'm here to speak about the Prospect Heights housing project, which had $1 million allocated, as the commissioner mentioned. Just very briefly, we're doing a lot with housing in Barry. This just sort of maps out the projects we have going on. There are various stages. The North End Gateway, which is trying to redevelop the North End, which was the hardest hit by our floods. Wabi Park, within that area, we're working with Downstreet to build 4 to 5 shared equity homes. Seminary Street is the furthest along. There's 32 housing units coming on a downtown parking lot. 143 North Main is very brand new. We're looking to buy a vacant building downtown and rebuild it. And I'm here to talk about Prospect Heights, which has the potential to be the biggest of these projects at 79 units. So just a brief summary of this project. This would be a development on a 37 acre lot. It's located on an elevated part of Berry City, so no flood damage, no flood risk. This was originally engineered to support a single family housing in the development. It received local zoning approval way back in 1991, and the subdivision was recorded in city records. We are right now in the process of designing infrastructure that it's re-engineered to today's standards, right? 1991 is a long time ago, different standards today. So that's where we are at this moment, trying to figure out exactly what we can have up there based on today's standards.
Can I stop you? Who owns this land right now? You said
This
it's
land is
30 acres.
37 acres.
I mean, 37 acres. Who owns it?
It's owned by Fecto Development, and the city has a purchase option on this land. The status right now, so the original zoning subdivision from 1991 allowed for about 128 units. We are doing preliminary engineering right now, due diligence, and we now estimate that site will support 79 units. And you can see there is wetlands up there, state protected wetlands. So that has carved into some of the housing units, primarily a lot of the single family units. So this is very preliminary still. They're doing the due diligence now, but the engineers doing this feel very confident that swath of wetlands will not be developable. That still leaves, like I said, 79 units that could go up on this site. The site would be able to support both single and multi-family units for a range of incomes, from affordable to missing workforce housing. So, for example, we have a
a separate board in Berry City, the Prospect Heights Board, that's working on this project. And as part of that board, we have partners like Down Street who would build more of the affordable housing. We also have Central Vermont Medical Center, which is desperate for workforce housing. So we're looking for a range of housing here that's needed in the city and in the region. The project cost at scale at the 128 units was estimated at $6 million. And we are now, as I said, we're in environmental due diligence. So we are awaiting the final results of this due diligence to understand how the total project cost will vary from that. But with only having, and I say only because 79 units, still a ton of units, but going from 128 to 79 will impact that. And we expect that to be lower, a lower cost. So it's hard to say at this point exactly what that is. The due diligence will be done sometime later this summer. They can't do the wetland study until beginning in May, I believe. So sometime after that, we will know exactly what the footprint can be on the development and what the associated cost reductions might be. We did receive a $3 million Northern Border Regional Commission grant to support this project. So the proposed state funding, if it's approved, would bring the total identified funding to $4 million, which could very well get us to a fully funded project or very near to one, assuming that we have the savings from reduction of units.
Stop you there. Go back. Just want to be clear.
This like, yeah.
Second bullet.
Yeah.
The original scale of the project costs were estimated $6 million.
Yes.
Was that the 128 units or the
Yes.
79?
That's the 128. Yes.
And that was how long ago that was done?
That estimate was done within the last 2 years because that was the estimate that was submitted to the Northern Border Regional Commission. So the Northern Border Regional
The
Commission,
3 million is based on the 128 units.
the $3 million grant was received from NBRC based on the expected cost of $6 million.
And that 6 million is based on the 128 units.
Correct. Yes.
So now the proposal is to really do 79 units.
Yeah.
At what cost?
That's what we have to wait for the environmental due diligence to be done, which will allow us to know what the final project cost will be. We expect it to be lower. It could be from anywhere from 4.5 to 5 million. But that will be known when environmental due diligence is done this spring.
Troy and then Brian.
Well, yeah, is that going to have an impact on the Northern Border grant then?
We don't expect it.
You don't?
No.
What are you basing that on?
We have notices to proceed on that grant. So we know it's to fund the project. What we cannot use on that grant is other federal funding sources.
I have the same question.
Sure.
And what's that money, the 4 million, buy?
That is to do the infrastructure to the site, right? So the site right now, if you can see here on this parcel map, I know it's a little bit small, but we would have to, it doesn't have roads, it doesn't have access to that site right now. What we would have to do is build roads to build those units. We would have to get water, sewer, stormwater up there.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So just broadly, the next steps, just on a more global level, this is a public-private partnership to build housing. So our role as a municipality is to build the infrastructure, and that's the construction, design, engineering of those elements I mentioned. Developers and other partners, as I mentioned, Down Street is very involved in this project as well. We'll build the housing units.
And I can understand the public, who's the private partner?
So that'll include Down Street, which is part of the board. Fecto, I know, is interested in building some of the single family units up there. So those are at least two of the interested partners in actually building the homes. The city will have no role in building the homes. We'll just get the services and the roads up to the parcels. And then we would expect Down Street, for example, to have a big interest in the multifamily units that are mapped out, and then probably Fecto and others in the single family units. We have used, we're very invested in this project ourselves. We have used $60,000 in ARPA funding to pay for the environmental due diligence. And that, like I said, that's expected to be complete sometime this summer after they're able to do the wetland studies. As I mentioned earlier, we have a purchase option on the land, so we have a really great pathway here to a project. We have ability to have site control, which is very important. We have the due diligence going in effect now. We have $3 million from NBRC, and this could really get us really close to what might be a fully funded project, pending what we hear from environmental due diligence on what the costs end up being.
So what you're saying, the 3 million that you already had, and the additional million possible from the state,
Yeah,
pay for the full project.
it could.
So it's beyond the infrastructure piece of water and sewer and roads and electrical. It could actually go into building some of the homes.
No, the what I mean by fully funded would be fully funded for the infrastructure. The building of the homes will be done by our partners like Downstreet, by Fecto. We could be at that point where we have the funding for the infrastructure or very close to it, right? We won't know exactly how much of a reduction there might be from the 6 million cost based on the reduction of units, but we expect to have a better picture of that once the due diligence is complete.
Kevin and Sean.
I think you said we have site control, and what does that mean?
Site control means that we have a pathway to own the property. So right now we don't own the property. It's owned by Fecto Residential.
Okay.
But we have an executed purchase option with Fecto for acquisition of the property, which is it's been extended once for the due diligence and it expires in October. So by October, we expect to be able to make a decision about executing that option because we will have the due diligence. We'll know how many units and costs, et cetera.
Very good.
Sean,
Is this all underground electric?
I don't know the answer to that.
And does it include sidewalks and bike paths?
It could, yeah, it could. Those pieces haven't been engineered or designed yet, but we will follow all our permitting zoning requirements for subdivision up there. And I'm not sure, but it's not out there, but the neighborhood adjacent to it includes all of those features, and I would expect this one to have a similar feel to that neighborhood.
Okay, thanks.
so the city has an option now to purchase.
Yes.
Is the city will be buying the property?
Yeah, the city would acquire the property. Yeah.
Madam Chair, may I also add some context here? This is really actually a phenomenal example of how municipalities decades ago used to foster housing development. The municipality would actually front the cost of bringing the infrastructure into these parcels. They do the road, they bring in the water and wastewater. Our municipalities are tapped now, so they haven't been able to do that. That's why you see projects themselves actually taking on the cost of the infrastructure. So this is a great model where the city, again, is stepping up in part because they can be the applicant to certain funding like NBRC to bring in all the roads and the other infrastructure.
Yeah. And if I may on that as well, that's reminded me of another salient point, which is that the city would acquire the property. The city would then sell back those lots to, for example, a Fecto or to a Downstreet to develop them. So they would have skin in the game too, to build up here. We would get the infrastructure up there, and we would own the property, but just like any property owner would do, when we would sell those lots back to them when they do eventually build on those sites.
So in the old days, the municipality would purchase the land and then do the infrastructure upgrade.
They may, or even if they didn't own the land themselves, they would still fund the infrastructure.
So what's being asked here is between the $3 million grant that you got from the regional commission and money from the state would be relieving the municipality of having to expend those dollars to provide the infrastructure to the.
That's right, Madam Chair. Dollars that they otherwise don't have. I shouldn't speak for Nicholas.
Yeah, right.
So how can we justify doing this for one community and not other communities in the state with our bonded dollars, with limited bonded capacity?
I can just speak for Berry City. We just took out a excess of $7 million bond to fix our headworks. So our bonding capacity is limited. Our ability to take on additional debt is limited as a municipality. So that's one. I think the other piece is we have a nearly turnkey project right here that could have 79 housing units potentially online in a part of the state that needs it. And in a part and that's not just for affordable, which is what Downstreet builds and is very much needed, but also for workforce housing, which are, our hospitals struggle to hire people. I know Berry City and Berrytown share a school district. The school district puts out advertisements every year for people to share their homes, for teachers to come into the area. We need a range of housing in Berry City and Berrytown and the central Vermont region, period. And this is what I would argue is a turnkey project that we may be sitting today with this $1 million, maybe, if not fully funded, very nearly fully funded to get shovels in the ground.
Just have a very difficult time justifying. We have limited bonding capacity on the state level as well. And I'm really struggling with putting aside $3 million plus in our bonding capacity for 3 communities this year. It could be 3 or 4 coming in us next year asking for the same amount of money. We don't have that capacity for bonded dollars on our side either. So that's what I'm struggling with. I'd rather see this money come out if we're going to do this, not to do bonded, but maybe regular cash.
Madam Chair, I wonder if this is a good opportunity for either Mr. Kramer or myself to answer that broader question, since Mr. Cirillo Castro really can't speak to that.
Can I get ahead of that just for a
Yeah,
second?
sure.
I just want to add I want to springboard off that with my own concerns. This is really difficult because I do not disagree with any of the points you're making. The need for housing is still clear to everybody, I think, in this building. I don't like being in this position. I don't like being put into this position of kind of looking at a clear need that we have to facilitate. And yes, we need teachers and we need hospital workers. And that is not at all dissimilar from problems that we're facing in Burlington. I don't know how these 3 projects got flagged. All of a sudden, they just showed up on the governor's recommend for $3.1 million. And my guess is that if we put this out to the state at large, that the state has given away $1 million at a pop for these types of projects, we would have far more than 3 applicants to that. And I know that Berry was hammered by these floods. I absolutely, and I'm not at all suggesting that this is not a project that needs state assistance. I just don't like the process by which it landed in our laps. And we don't have any information as to how the state made or the administration made the decision to just give $1 million at a pop to these 3 sites. Yeah, so that's where I'm really stuck right now, and to be frank, a little frustrated.
Right now, Nick Kramer from the administration led this week. So Nick,
Great.
you could identify yourself.
For the record, Nick Kramer, Chief Operating Officer of the Agency of Administration. And I'll start by just saying, I think we certainly appreciate your frustration, Representative, and share the challenge of, this is budgeting 101, right? When you have a limited amount of funding and way more needs out there than you have funding to meet, inevitably there are always hard choices, whether it's internally within state government. We go through this same exercise every year, looking at all the requests from our own departments and agencies to fund their operations. This is the operating budget side. Same thing with the remainder of this capital bill that this committee's been spending a lot of time on. What you see in front of you is the end result of a long process of weighing really important things that are all really valid, and we wish we could do all of everything. And of course, we have to make difficult decisions and prioritize. So I think I've heard repeatedly in this committee the concern, well, this is a new type of construct for the capital bill. This is sort of an unusual construct in that there's this public-private partnership aspect and money flowing through ACP directly to municipalities. I think the short answer at a high level is this was just like any other priority that we weigh, we looked at what are the universe of things we are aware of. In this case, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is constantly trying to keep their finger on the pulse of all of the housing projects that we're aware of at the state that we're involved with in some capacity. And as the governor has said, as members of this body have said, right, housing is a critical top priority. We have been feeling like we're in this crisis mode for years and years and years on this. So I think this was an area where we felt like, let's not, yes, we wish we could fund every single project. We can't, we don't have the capacity, as it's not the funding capacity. Over time, maybe we can fund more things like this. I mean, what we were really looking for is what is the best bang for our buck, so to speak, the best return on investment for a dollar, regardless of whether it's a bonded dollar or a cash dollar. We know we need housing. We know housing is really, really expensive to build, particularly in the capital context, right? This committee has seen skyrocketing costs. These three projects were taken from a list, and I'll defer to the commissioner on more detail later if there are, but a list of projects we were aware of, and we looked at, all right, which of these projects is close to the finish line? Which of these projects has significant buy-in already from the community and is moving forward and would have maximum sort of community good? Again, there were plenty of projects on the list that meet these criteria, but we looked at kind of the intersection of all of these points. And flood risk. And some of our other resiliency goals, the larger regional context. These communities all play sort of key economic roles, and they were chosen to be from very different parts of Vermont. And then lastly, I mean, for the amount of funding that we're putting in each case, as you point out, $1 million, what are we getting in terms of a finished product? How much does that state investment of $1 million get in terms of units created? In one case you'll hear about later, childcare slots created, potential mixed commercial development. These were just three really exemplary projects. And it's not that they're really exemplary projects in the state, but we had this rare opportunity with some additional capacity in the capital bill to make investments in exactly the kind of thing that we all know that we need to. And we felt like, let's get out of our own way on this one and try to help these projects move forward. As to what happens next year, I mean, I think that's a valid point. Well, my personal hope is we have additional capacity to help make these kinds of investments. I mean, gosh knows the state.
Yeah, have you considered formalizing this into some sort of state grant project that takes money from, in this case, the capital bill into a weighted vetting process by which these projects are continually considered?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Representative, to say that it's certainly not formal in that there's no codified, like a website you could go to see the criteria. It's formalized in the sense that internally, this is how we draft a capital bill, right? We weigh things.
But this has never been in the capital bill.
No, but I think there are other examples where we've provided funding for municipal infrastructure in the capital bill, certainly in, you look at a clean water space, there's municipal pollution control grants.
Yep.
There's a lot of similar.
But they're grants, and they've developed into application processes, and that's what I'm wondering, is if you're moving in that direction.
I think if this continues to be an area of collaboration and shared focus with the legislature, I mean, I think we'd be open to conversations about how we think about this and codify it. We were in this case trying to get money out the door. We knew that there were these three really excellent projects. And so this seems like it makes me kind of help the city commissioners.
Yeah, I just to complement what Nick said there, a consideration was also the fact that while we know the legislature and other committees is pondering broader solutions such as project-based TIF, how can we broaden the use of TIF as it exists? How can we establish other infrastructure funds? Part of our calculus as we are weighing the various projects is project readiness and urgent need. We don't know what's going to happen next summer. There's a reasonable chance that any one of these communities could experience flooding again. And so to sort of leave these projects that can have a significant impact now, leave these in limbo, it didn't feel like, while the other concerns that you're raising, Madam Chair and committee, were considered certainly internally, we couldn't justify waiting on these projects.
Anyway, no more people come knocking at your door. 'Cause it's bad.
And I would hope, Madam Chair, that the other solutions that the legislature is working on can help alleviate that broader need in mind. But also, I think Mr. Kramer is right. If people come knocking, they come knocking, and we find a way to manage it as we budget every year.
If I might, Madam Chair, they're already knocking, right? This is part of the budget process we go through every year. We know of needs, and I think we're lucky, we feel lucky when we have the capacity to be able to fund things.
Well, I think this is why Representative Hedrick's point is really well taken, or should be taken well, in that this probably should have been proposed as a new grant program. I don't think that would have been hard to propose or to get off the ground. So it's not that any of us, I don't think, don't support the projects. There's a different way to do it. And I think that a grant program, and these being the initial start of it, maybe would be more suitable. That's just an opinion, but.
Well, I'm losing my voice, but we've got to go on. We didn't want you to be the only one in the hot seat.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I'm
Appreciate
gonna
it.
go to Shanna
Thank you.
from Bennington, and you'll be in the hot seat too. So I don't know if you heard me or not.
I think it's Zach that's going to show the slides.
Yeah, Shannon, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us here today and joining you. And my name is Shannon Barsati. I'm the Community Development Director for the town of Bennington. And Zach Hale here is our private partner with Hale Resources. And he's going to be showing the slides. So I think he's going to get us started.
So whoever wants to talk,
Muted, Zach.
just fade.
Thanks for that. Sorry about that. Yeah, so my name is Zach Hale with Hale Resources in Bennington, Vermont, and we are a real estate development company and property manager in Bennington. We currently property manage about 200 units here, and we've actually purchased, renovated, and now maintain about 150 units in the since 2009. So I'm going to hand it over to Shannon to kind of, actually I did just want to mention one more of we're here to present the Ben High redevelopment project, the two of us, but we do have a huge team that's working on this right now, and we're really close to getting this project over the finish line. So definitely just want to give a shout out to all the people involved, but it probably equals hundreds at this point. So, but this is our team, so.
Great. So as Zach mentioned, he has a family business as a housing developer here in Bennington. This map is showing, first of all, Ben High. What we're talking about is the largest building within our designated downtown. Here on the right-hand side, you can see it. It's about 100,000 square feet and was previously the public high school, then the middle school, and it has sat vacant for 20 years now. So it's a very important part of our downtown that understandably has, it being vacant for so long, has had a negative effect on the whole surrounding area. And the street Pleasant behind the Ben High building we've really been focused on some targeted investment here, partly because it's a historic area with some beautiful, large, single-family homes that have been broken into, multi-unit. And so we have a history of partnering with Zach through the community development program for CDBG grants. Also, we have a revolving loan fund. So some multiple properties along Pleasant Street we've already worked on together to create new housing. But Ben High is the big one. And if we can get this done, it really is serving the community in so many ways and is a truly transformational project. So you can see the building itself has multiple additions, you know, this original and this old postcard. The building was first opened in 1914 and then was our public high school for over 50 years, then becoming the middle school. And you can see from this floor plan, you know, some of the different additions that have been added on, like the gymnasium in the late 30s, as well as this part of the building that kind of goes off to the right here in the 50s and then into the 70s. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as well. If you want to go to the next slide, Zach. And then this shows that currently its condition, obviously being vacant for so long, it's degraded over time. There's been quite a bit of water damage from a busted sprinkler from a previous owner. So that needs to be repaired, as well as just, you know, general, you know, deterioration over time. But it is a very large property. And part of the reason we started looking at it from the town's perspective was not only for the housing, which we desperately need, but also for the potential for public recreation space. When we went through our ARPA prioritization project with the town, with the select board and public meetings and surveys, the top choice for municipal investment was in vacant properties downtown, this being the largest, as well as housing and recreation. So, and now that there's also a childcare center as part of the project, that's really meeting multiple uses for the community. And one of the reasons this building has been so difficult to redevelop is because all of these spaces don't all lend themselves to housing. So the town is coming in with 3 million of our ARPA funds towards the areas that the town will be using for our recreation program and our senior program. And so in addition to our ARPA funds, we're also doing we have an executed development agreement with the Hales for a long-term lease on those spaces. It's about 27,000 square feet of space. And being the anchor tenant in the building really allows the Hales to then redevelop the other areas for housing.
Thanks, Shannon. So I just wanted to first, this is the vision, and this is what it's actually been vacant for about 20 years. I don't think that was mentioned, and we've been working on this for almost 3 now, getting it to where it is today. And the vision for the space is to utilize it for community space and also housing. So there's going to be two condos. The building will be cut up into 2 condos on this. This is the second floor up here, and this green space here will be 17 perpetually affordable housing units. And then there will be 22 middle income units that are all represented here in the blue. And then there will be a recreation space. So the YMCA, the town will rent the space and then give it to the YMCA. And they'll utilize this yellow space here and also the purple space here. The senior center will be in this salmon color. And then there'll be the UVM extension will be in this brown color here. So, and then there'll be a public meeting space in this green space here. And then the childcare facility is on the ground floor, and that one is all right here. It's about 12,000 square feet here, and that will be directly rented by the YMCA. So I saw some of the other testimonies given. I know that there was a big question on sources and what's being utilized. So this is where this funding would fit in right here. These are all the different grants that we've accumulated over the last 3 years. And so and I'm sure you can go over them maybe in detail after, but there's a lot of different entities and sources and a lot of support for this project. And at this point, we're at about 14 million in grants. One of the things that's making this project a lot more feasible is the tax credit equity, and then there are private equity sources and also a handful of debt. So this is a lot of information, but I do have this slide, which is just a pie chart to kind of look at the total amount of tax credit equity here. And then these are the federal grants that are coming in. This is the town's ARPA, and then their contribution from just local taxpayer dollars. And then these are the state grants here. This would include that capital bill funding. This is the total amount of debt, and then this is the private equity investment here, that 4.2.
So if I can ask a question, or someone could ask for me, for the state grants, outside of the 1 million from us, where's those other monies coming from? Did you hear me, or can somebody?
Yeah, I heard you. Where's the money coming from for state grants? So there's the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. It has $3 million. And then there is ACCD. Most of that is in Brownsfield funding, but there was some other funding, like the Community Development Block Grant is a big one. The BRF funding, there's the CRRP funding through DED. And then there's Becca Ballant has some, well, that's the federal source. So I guess that was another.
Getting a lot of state help. You're already getting a lot of state help.
Yeah, it is I mean, this building has been vacant because it's a really complex and challenging project that we've overcome a lot of different things throughout the years. So there is, yes, 14 mil, the state is investing should this funding be awarded 7.6 million, but this 22 million here is really, this is coming from mostly outside sources. So outside of Vermont even. So and then there's a significant amount of private equity and a lot of debt too. So
What's the total project cost that you're anticipating?
it's right here, this 55 million right here.
Yeah. Mary?
So Zach, this is Mary Morrissey from Bennington. Could you explain how for my colleagues, how the project went from 20 million to now the 55 million? And I was kind of amazed when I saw that Barry was doing 79 units for $4 million project, and ours is 39 or 40 units. And we're in a main part of what you're presenting is the housing. Yes, there's other pieces within it, but how did we get there? And for the first time, and I've asked this for the last year and a half or longer, all of these grants, and you finally have a sheet with them on it. So I'm pleased to see that. But could you explain to the committee that is seriously looking at this, because these were 3 highlighted projects that have some real concerns. One of the things that was stated when the governor presented his budget was the Meals on Wheels, and we were told, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, that that's off the project now. And I would like to know what the cost per unit for the apartments now is at, because there's a lot of questions out there, and I'm being asked every day by constituents. So maybe you can certainly shed a light for my committee members.
And Madam Chair, I should, just for Nicholas's sake, clarify that the 4 to 5 or 6 million, that project cost was just the infrastructure. That's not the project cost. The project will likely cost tens of millions. Nicholas is focused on the city infrastructure. The apples and oranges.
But I was talking the apartments.
Right, that doesn't include any housing.
Right, understood, but that was for the apartments.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So I think when it comes to the cost, I understand it's a lot, and it did go from 20 to 55. I have been very persistent through this process, and each time I run into an issue, I have not given up, and I've found ways to get it, like, overcome it. And other developers have looked at this project, many, like a dozen, and they've run into the same challenges, and they've went and found other projects to pursue. And
I believe your dad several years ago got funding to actually look at doing the project, and it was not feasible. So it has taken 3 years to continue to kind of patchwork this together. And I commend you for trying hard, but I'm not sure if this is, I still have great concern with 100 and some students or children in the basement of that building.
Well, I totally understand your concern, and it is a ground floor, so there are full windows, and their YMCA is going to operate the facility, and they have a facility just like it in Pittsfield, and they were actually the ones that envisioned it and really had the idea, because before there wasn't going to be childcare here, so and when it comes to the challenges that we faced, this is it's been vacant for a long time, and it's 100,000 square feet, 4 construction areas in the middle of our downtown. And it's not as if we can just say, oh, let's spend less money as a state, right? We're talking about $7 million. Most of the remediation to take care of the Brownsfield it's about $5 million, which needs to be spent just to tear this building down. So there's funding to do that, but we are taking on over almost $4 million just in or almost $3 million just in debt. Like I personally am taking on $3 million of debt that I'm going to use to take care of that Brownsfield remediation, and I'm going to pay that back to the state so they can do that in the future, right? So it would probably be the town that would have to, or the state maybe paying that money, but we're not getting this other asset and being able to actually raise the money to do a project like this, because we're raising money for historic tax credits. This is going to be 100% electric building, and so it'll have geothermal heating and cooling, and it'll have solar on the roof. And then there will be and then some of the other things that we have to do is flood proofing. So this is right in a flood zone in the middle of our downtown, and this building, after we're done, will be able to withstand 4 feet of water coming through downtown Bennington, and basically be a boat in the middle of Bennington that will have very minor impact from something like that, and be able to continue to be used. So and that has taken a lot of effort to try to overcome, and is part of the reason why it's so expensive. And one of the things we ran into at the very end of the project too.
Could you also explain Mr. Gilbert's, I guess, piece of this? Because there is another person involved in this project.
Actually, I'll step in there, Zach. So because the town first, before Zach came on as our partner, the current owner, Chris Gilbert, owns the building. The town has site control because we have a lease with a option to purchase agreement that will transfer to Zach at the financial closing. And so the Hales will own the building. The town will have a long-term lease. I think, Mary, when you mentioned the escalating costs, Zach mentioned, the total remediation cost was not known at that time. The childcare portion was not a part of the project. We now have 102 childcare units that will be part of the project. The flood proofing of the building, which is required, by the state, it's very expensive, but it will have all of those things when it's done.
Shannon, do you have to also mitigate where the windows were off the building for a couple of years? Are you going to have to mitigate mold and whatever else is in there, because those windows were off the building for a very long time? So
Yeah,
is
I mean,
that
that will be
part of the project?
That'll be part of the cleanup process. It's a little hard to explain to folks, but until Zach owns the building, literally the regulations are he cannot go in and do anything, even sealing up those windows. So that's why we really want to get to this closing, because we've worked with Zach before in the past. We know that he can get this done. We have with these funds, we'll have all the funding in place, and there's been overwhelming support for this project. The select board has approved the development agreement. We had letters of support from our 2 top employers, the CEO of the hospital, as well as our superintendent. So we're very excited to move this project forward.
So if you don't get the state 1.1 million, what happens?
It's going to be challenging to move forward. I mean, this is funding that is coming in at a critical time towards the very end of a project, while we're in closing calls and facing all sorts of challenges, and it's just like always overcoming obstacles. So I can't tell you it won't happen, because that can't be the mindset that I have, but like this is a significant contribution to this project to get us over the finish line right now.
And what other contributions are you waiting for to get you over the finish line?
All the other sources here have been awarded and are working towards a closing right now. So,
And you're
given
talking the grant sources?
yeah, the grant sources are all committed. Yeah.
So 13 million?
Yeah. Yeah. So in some of what we're working through right now is just working with a handful of new market tax credit, like CDEs, and it's a very complex and it's a very complex project with a lot of people. I mean, we meet with 50 people every Friday to get this project over the finish line, and there's a lot of moving pieces right now. So we're drafting documents and updating financial projections and working through a closing. And this is something that they're looking at as the state really coming in to support this project and making sure that it gets over the finish line and that there's this support here. So. And I had a couple other slides too that we could jump through.
We have one more question.
This is more a question for the administration. Can you talk about why you're putting this as bonded dollars rather than cash?
I think Representative, as I've spoken to before, we see the two
You see
as
it, okay.
interchangeable.
Gotcha.
Go ahead. We got another question. Well,
No, and this is for the administration as well. I don't understand why, like you just said, how you guys view it as interchangeable between the cash and the bonded, dollars. Why is this not in appropriations or like in a big bill? Why is it coming here? I guess that's my main question.
Yeah, sure, Representative. So we had the capacity in the capital bill as we went through our prioritization process. And I think it's important to flag, and the commissioner can speak much more eloquently about this. The governor put forward a pretty comprehensive housing proposal this year that includes a number of different appropriations and a number of different components in the big bill. So these three projects are just one small fraction of overall what the administration just put forward in housing in FY26. It just so happened as we were going through our capital bill exercise, and we've done the trimming to this state project and that state project, and we're kind of looking at overall capacity. There was a moment where we realized, well, we might have a little bit of additional capacity to move some of these things forward. And that was really exciting to us because, as has been pointed out, that's not always the case, right? Whereas on the general fund side, it's a larger universe of competing priorities, and there's Medicaid and all of these really massive programs. So it's really just a function of where the capacity was. And the fact that in each of these projects, the specific needs that we've been discussing are these really durable, tangible, long-lasting infrastructure assets, which is entirely in line with the function of the capital.
Yeah, so just following up, like the housing crisis isn't going away, obviously, in the next few years. Can we anticipate that the capital bill requests will continue to include sort of individual housing requests for public-private partnerships?
I wish I could give you an answer, Representative. I mean, I think the truth is we can never anticipate anything about any budget, right? We have to see what the overall funding availability looks like. A lot will depend on CDAC, whether they make a mid-biennial readjustment. Other projects that we have going on. I know Commissioner Manoli's been in here talking about the ongoing work with FEMA and the Montpelier complex. I think I can safely say that we will certainly continue to be thinking about, are there opportunities where we can leverage any dollar we have, whether it's an operating budget dollar or a capital bill dollar, to help alleviate the issues that are driving the housing crisis, as you put it, right? So certainly something that will continue to be a focus. I don't think we can ever really say for sure what a future budget's going to bring, especially this year, right? Given all the federal uncertainties and all the ways things may shake out in the next 12 months.
I mean, I just say my hesitation is, you have three communities here, and I actually think these are all deserving projects that I'd like to fund, but it opens up the floodgates with any of our communities saying, hey, Downstreet's got a great project in town here. Can you throw in a few bob for them?
I may be able to help with that. And thank you, Representative, because that's a really great point. And, you all are at a disadvantage because you're hearing this outside of the context of the full proposal and you don't get to see which aspects of our proposal are now being taken up by the other committees, largely to address some of these concerns with the infrastructure and how to fund them. And we are seeing that there's an opportunity for a lot more tools to fund things like infrastructure, particularly infrastructure geared towards housing. And so, you know, that leads to the natural question. So then why these projects, why did these deserve more urgency? Well, the flood risk is certainly one that really it was part of our ranking criteria. And then what it came down to, particularly in this project, is the risk of losing out on a lot of ARPA dollars from both the state and the town that are invested in this. That has also drawn in a lot of other private investment. And so to not make this commitment now, these projects are at a point where it'd be too much risk to hope that by the time some of these other programs, hopefully that the legislature is able to get passed through, by the time they're stood up next year, it would be far too late, especially for this project. And so this is really a timing thing. The urgency is really right here on this one.
So, Zach, why don't you finish?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I also heard some questions about the perpetual affordability and the affordability and the restrictions on the housing units. And so to cover that, I just wanted to present the slide, so 17 units will be perpetually affordable housing, and that's a restriction by VHCB in the LIHTC condo, and that will be two units below 30% AMI, 4 units below 50% AMI, and 6 units below 60% AMI. That should actually be 11. Sorry, those don't add up. I apologize for that. So 11 units below 60% AMI. And then there will be another, and 3 of these units will be targeted to people facing homelessness. And then there'll also be 22 units that are restricted, and these are the middle income units, and they'll have a restriction on them from VHFA for a period of 20 years, because that's some of the debt that we're using, and it's their debt that requires these restrictions. And 5 of those units will be below 80% AMI, and then the other 17 will be below 120% AMI. And the use of these funds, so as I mentioned, the use will be to do the geothermal system and the actual wells, drilling the wells into the ground. And so it'd be 26 wells at 500 feet each, and then the actual flood proofing of the building. And so this is just, we'll have to get flood proof logs that we can put on all the doors. And then the windows, we actually need to put flood proof glass on all of the windows down at this level. And then there's also other things like being able to pump the water that's going to try to lift the building out of the ground and relieve pressure from the slab. We'll have to be able to pump that water out. So we'll have all of these ports in the floor, and it'll come in just like an inch, and then there'll be pumps that pump all the water out during a flood so that it doesn't just leak in. So those are some of the things that we've needed to do in order to make this possible.
Just found this.
And then, and so we're targeting an April closing right now, and then we'd plan for 18 months of construction, and we'd place it in service in 2026, at the end of 2026. So those are all my slides.
So there's 39 housing units
in total.
And then what is it for retail or commercial space?
It would be the YMCA would have a recreation center.
Yeah.
There'd be a senior, the UM extension would have an office classroom, a 100-spot childcare facility, and a public meeting space.
And those are all they're going to pay rent.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And
the public meeting space doesn't have a tenant, so we are not projecting revenue from that. So that's to be determined how that space is used. I know there's a need in the community, and that's kind of how we found it. It's an old auditorium with a stage and stuff. And then the childcare facility, that would be a direct lease between us and the owners and the YMCA. And then the town would rent the rest of the space for the other uses.
And then without breaking it out, but so the project is 55 million roughly?
That's right.
So that's $1.3 million per housing unit. I mean, taking out the fact that we're doing other stuff, but if we're just only talking about the cost of housing, we divide that 55 by 39. I know there's other things in there, but now
Yeah,
it's his head no, like I don't have the math.
That's it's, you can't look at it that way, because it's not just the house.
It's our investment, but yeah.
Well, but the whole point of this is that it's a regional impact because it's multifaceted. It's
Yeah.
not only housing units.
Well, right, and that's why I started with, like, I know we gotta break that other part out, but just if we were only talking about only, I know we're not, but if we're only talking about the cost of the housing.
So you're saying theoretically, if they didn't develop the full building, they only developed part of it and just did housing?
Yeah.
I don't know, would that be possible, Zach or Shannon, to only
I'm not-
develop a?
Well, I'm not saying to do it, I'm just trying to, in my head, rationalize the cost and, but I'm still stuck on.
I mean, the cost is really high because of Brownsfield is a huge one. The geothermal is making it a little bit more expensive, but that is also bringing operational costs down for like long-term sustainability. And then the floodproofing is really expensive as well. And then it's just 4 different areas of construction. There's a lot of cost that goes into, especially the new market tax credit side, structuring all of that and everything. I mean, we're at a point where we've have $2.5 million into it just to get all of the planning done. And like, that's where we are today, trying to get to a closing.
And how long has that taken? How long have people been working on this?
About 3 years.
Mary?
Zach and Shannon, where Meals on Wheels is not going to be, have you found another food entity that may go into there? Because that was a key point that the governor brought up in his budget address as well. So that would be feeding the different resources. So what do you have on deck to fill that space?
That space will be managed by the YMCA. So the reason that that Meals on Wheels had to come out of the project, Zach was looking for any way to cut some costs, and we had no grant funding for the Meals on Wheels space. And so the cost of creating a whole new kitchen with new appliances, because part of the building itself, some of the tax credit requirements are that it is 100% electric. So that made the cost of building out all of that space very expensive for Meals on Wheels. And there was Meals on Wheels didn't have any way to support that financially. So that cost would have had to be borne completely by Zach. So that's why that happened. But we do have very robust senior programming and after school programming that the Y does with our local school system. And they also have a 21st Century Learning grant that they just received for the next 5 years. So that space will essentially be senior programming all morning. And then it will become after school programming, as well as space that can be rented by the community on the weekends when the Y is not running programs to there. So we certainly have a use for it. And that's how we'll proceed.
So basically our 1.1 million just goes to the total project cost in order to help you go forward with the project.
Yes.
So we need to keep moving. I'm sorry, my voice is disappearing. Cleo, I want to do the Brattleboro one. Committee, please be patient. If we can work a little bit longer and can take a short lunch break. But folks spent a lot of time waiting for us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the consideration.
Thank you, Zach and Shannon. Thank you. Cleo. Chloe.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Better than me.
Great. Let me make sure I can get that. I will talk quickly. Thank you for your patience. My name is Chloe Leary, and I'm the Executive Director of the Winston Prouty Center in Brattleboro. Appreciate your time. We purchased the former Austin School campus in 2016. They out of bankruptcy, and we've been managing the space. It's 130,000 square feet of mixed use space, not residential, about 30 plus tenants. So the past 9 years we've been managing it. We see ourselves as stewards of a really significant community asset. You know, we didn't need a 180-acre campus, but we needed to, you know, we were growing and needed space, and we see ourselves as sort of, how can we use this asset for our community? As we've discussed, housing comes to the surface over and over again. So why would we build housing here? It's really, I don't know if folks have been to the campus before. It's actually one of the most beautiful views up the Connecticut River Valley, so I'll make a plug for that. But it's already on infrastructure. It's close to downtown, close to hospital, close to retail. We have public transportation on site. It's already a really vibrantly used campus. So we felt like it was our responsibility to explore housing. We've been doing this, our first master plan we completed in 2023, so 2 years. It's gone through several iterations based on feedback and just our learning. And this is where we currently are. The gray buildings are existing. The brown buildings are what we're proposing for housing. Again, it's mostly commercial, retail, nonprofit, not retail, but what we would, you know, there's a UVM extension here, a lawyer's office, other education programs. So we're adding residential to the site. Phase 1 is down. I'm highlighting it. We're ready to do that. It's just a small part of the project. And what this funding would pay for is a pump house. So we are up on a hill, and we had a block grant, a planning grant to look at what water sewer infrastructure upgrades were needed. And part of is actually an existing problem, the pressure from the town system up to the campus. So this would be based on the estimate we got from the engineering group. This would pay for a pump house, and it will happen in phase 1 because that's where the siting would be. So I just wanted to highlight that this, you know, we're ready to go, and this would help get that infrastructure in and minimize disruption down the road. So there's a rendering of the site. We've done all our studies. We are in the middle of our development review board hearing. We've submitted our stormwater permit. We are communicating with Act 250 about our exemption status. What I want to emphasize, and our goal is to build by the end of this year. It's very aspirational. And I just, you know, I think part of what we have been thinking about is how do we keep holding out a North Star and keep moving and keep momentum going? Because you know, a few years ago, Brattleboro needed 500 units of housing just to meet demand then. It's only gotten worse. So how can we use this community asset? And we've been talking about up to 300 units, not throughout the woods and on the campus, but really where the main part of campus is already developed. So, and part of what's different about our project is we're really thinking about how to have a healthy housing continuum. There's a lot of investment in affordable housing, absolutely important. I think we do it really well, even if we need more of it. But part of the development equation is that we don't have the missing middle. I think Nicholas talked about this, and just, you know, teachers, doctors, people accept jobs in our community and then don't come because they can't find a place to live. So we're really thinking about that missing middle and how we, again, can contribute to a healthy housing continuum. So funding, I just want to point out a couple of things. Those numbers are too small. I just wanted to give you a sample of like, how are we thinking about this project funding wise? So because we are a nonprofit, we don't need to make money. We just can't lose money. We're trying to keep the capital stack really simple. So, you know, not accessing the typical funding streams partially that might go into a project this size, like the low-income housing tax credits, partially because we don't want to cannibalize a limited source that goes to our housing trusts, partially because we want to make sure that we have really mixed income. You know, we don't want to keep segregating people by income. A robust neighborhood has all kinds of people in it, so we want the flexibility to do that. And we, again, want to keep the capital stack simple. So theoretically, if we can borrow 80%, 75 to 80% in debt and then raise the rest in equity, that would keep it for, can we make that pencil out? So the challenge in Vermont around development, I'm sure you've heard this, is that the value at the end of the day is less than the cost. So how much can you borrow? And that equation is where we're really trying to, you know, see what is workable. I've learned a lot in the past few years. there's likely to be a gap. And some of those gaps are things like infrastructure costs. If the developer has to pay for infrastructure, it makes the project not pencil out. So what are creative ways that we can come up with solutions to cover the gap? I see this proposal of the allocation as one way to try to do that, as one tool. Hey, like, let's try to see if we can get move the needle on housing development if we invest in infrastructure this way. There are other ways: low interest, no interest loans, bonds, different kinds of equity investment. But so I think, I see it as, how do we, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same outcome, which is not enough housing. So I certainly appreciate your consideration for what are some creative tools to make a difference and help solve what is a community and state and national crisis, frankly. So I hear what the committee's saying around maybe a grant program would be more equitable, or, what, absolutely, there are different, it's worth talking about how do we do it, but the fact that we might need that we do need public investment to close the gap, I think is sort of indisputable. So, yep, that is, I'm going to stop there because everybody's probably hungry, and let me see if I can stop sharing. And
What is
take some questions.
is it the 9 million?
Chloe, what's your total cost for the project? Is it the 9 million?
We're estimating 9 million for this first phase. Yes.
And how many houses does that get us?
That's 28 units. So average $320,000 per unit, 321. And that's just, that's our back of the envelope. We are, we're in the process of we're talking modular construction, and we are right now getting quotes from 2 manufacturers. So, that give or take some percentage, but yeah, that's where we are.
I've got a question on the 1 million, if somebody can relay this. The 1 million is buying the pump house. What is the capacity that's going to serve? Is that going to serve up to the 300 units?
Yes. Yeah.
That was it. That was mine.
Sort of a more general version of that question, to go from phase 1 to, as close as you could get to 300. Will you be seeking, do you need more state investment, or what's that going to look like, the expansion?
Yeah, I think part of the reason I'm really excited about phase 1 is because I think we will learn a lot about what we will need to make the next phases successful. It's sort of a bite-sized, does this work? Does it pencil out? And, I don't know if we can, one of the promises of modular manufacturing is the more you do, the more efficiencies there might be. Can that drive down costs? Are there other funding streams we might find? So when I talk about if there's going to be a gap between value and cost and how do we make this pencil out, I think is the state wanting to be part of the solution, or municipalities, or individual investors? So maybe, but I think we'll learn more about what is that gap and find ways to cover it. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry that I'm losing my voice.
I'm sorry you're losing I hope you feel okay.
Yeah, I feel fine. I just feel fine.
We do have a website if you want to learn more. I know I talked really fast, and feel free. I'm happy to talk to anybody, as so feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the
Chloe.
time. This has been very helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for hearing from the project.
Yeah, we'll be doing some digging both for that. So